My cousin Nate woke from a dream of drowning the taste of salt thick in his throat before he ever set foot on Matinus Rock. He told me this in the summer of 2022. His voice, low eyes, distant, as if the ocean still clung to him. Nate's been with the Coast Guard for over a decade, a man carved from routine and discipline. He doesn't spin tales or chase ghosts. He's the kind of guy who trusts his hands, his tools, and the solid deck of a boat beneath his feet. So when he told me about Matinus Rock, I listened. Every word burned into me, unchanging each time he repeated it, like a warning etched in stone. Matinus Rock isn't a place you find on a map unless you're looking for trouble. It's a jagged scar of an island off Maine's coast, barely more than a pile of rocks lashed by waves. No trees, no grass, just stone and salt. The lighthouse stands alone, a weathered sentinel, its beam cutting through fog to guide ships that rarely pass. Next to it, a single auxiliary building squats holding fuel and tools. No power grid, no plumbing, no cell signal. You get there by boat or helicopter, and even then, the sea decides if you arrive. The lighthouse runs itself automated, but every year or so, the Coast Guard sends someone to scrape the rust, check the gears, and keep the light alive. In 2017, that someone was Nate paired with Russell, a quiet guy with a knack for engines. The assignment was simple: 2 weeks of maintenance. The year before, strange electrical failures had plagued the beacon, so the guard sent 2 men instead of 1. Nate didn't think much of it. He'd done remote postings before, thrived in the solitude of open water. But the dream lingered, waves pulling him under, hands reaching from the depths as the boat carried them to Matinus Rock. The air was sharp, heavy with salt, and the island loomed like a forgotten grave. The lighthouse towered above its paint-peeling windows dark. The auxiliary building smelled of diesel and decay, its metal walls pitted by years of spray. Their first day was all routine. Nate and Russell unloaded crates, checked the diesel generator, and tested the emergency batteries. The beacon's gears groaned, but turned, casting its light across the sea. They worked in silence, the wind their only company. At night, they ate canned stew, played cards, and read dog-eared paperbacks. The isolation was expected, even comforting. Nate felt the rhythm of the place, the pulse of the light sweeping overhead. But the dream clung to him, a shadow in his mind. He saw faces in the waves, pale and bloated, watching. He shook it off, blamed the long boat ride, the stale air. The second day brought more of the same. They scraped salt corrosion from the lighthouse's metal interior, the kind that eats through steel if you let it. The spiral staircase to the beacon room was narrow, cold underfoot, each step echoing. Russell was methodical, checking wires, tightening bolts. Nate liked him. Steady, no nonsense. They talked about boats, the guard, the cold that seeped into your bones out here. The sea was calm, the sky gray, but clear. Nothing felt wrong. Not yet. But Nate couldn't shake the weight in his chest, like the air was thicker than it should be. Something was waiting, biding its time. That night, he lay in his cot, staring at the ceiling. The beacon's light swept through the room, a metronome of shadow and glow. He thought of the dream again. The hands, the cold, the pull of the deep. He told himself it was nothing, just his mind playing tricks. But the island felt alive, its silence too heavy, its darkness too deep. He closed his eyes, willing sleep to come. Outside, the waves whispered against the rocks, a sound that wasn't quite a lullaby. They were alone, or so he thought. The lighthouse stood, watch its light, cutting through the night. But something else was stirring, something older than the stones beneath them. What do you do when the light you're meant to keep burns out? Nate would learn soon enough. The sea had its secrets, and Matinus Rock was no place for the living. Before the cloth appeared, the air turned against Nate, heavy as a storm that never broke. On the third day, he woke with a pressure in his skull, like the island itself was pressing down. The sky was clear, no clouds, no wind, just an endless gray that swallowed the horizon. Matinus Rock felt smaller, the lighthouse looming larger, its shadow stretching across the rocks like a warning. Nate tried to focus on work, checking the beacon's lenses, refilling the generator, but his hands felt clumsy, his thoughts sluggish. Russell noticed it too, though he didn't say much. His eyes darted to the sea more than usual, lingering on the waves. The routine held them together. They climbed the spiral staircase, tools clanking, and inspected the beacon's gears. The mechanism was old, but functional, a marvel of engineering that kept the light turning. Nate ran his fingers along the metal, feeling the hum of the motor. It was grounding, real. But the air was wrong. It clung to his skin, damp and heavy, like breathing through a wet cloth. He glanced at Russell, who was wiping sweat from his brow despite the cold. Neither spoke of it, but the island was changing its silence, growing teeth. That night, they ate in the auxiliary building, the only place with a table. The room smelled of rust and fuel, the walls stained with years of neglect. Nate tried to joke something about the food tasting like cardboard, but his voice fell flat. Russell just nodded, staring at his plate. The beacon's light swept through the window, casting their shadows on the wall. Nate felt it again, the weight, the watchfulness. He looked outside, half expecting to see someone standing on the rocks. Nothing but darkness and stone. On the fourth night, it happened. Nate woke at 2:00 a.m., his heart pounding. The air was thicker, almost solid, pressing against his chest. He sat up, gasping, and realized the beacon wasn't turning. The room was too dark, the familiar sweep of light gone. Something was wrong, terribly wrong. He stumbled to his feet, grabbed a flashlight, and shook Russell awake. The other man blinked confused, but followed without question. They climbed the spiral staircase, the metal cold under their hands, each step louder than it should be. At the beacon room, they found the gears still moving, but the light was dead. Nate's flashlight caught something in the mechanism, a dark, heavy shape wedged deep. It was a piece of cloth soaked and slimy, like an old coat dredged from the sea. The smell hit him first, rotting seaweed mildew, the stench of something long dead. It shouldn't be here. The door was locked, the windows sealed. No wind could have carried it inside. Russell swore under his breath, his face pale in the flashlight's glow. They pried the cloth free, its weight unnatural, and tossed it outside. The wind took it, swallowing it into the night. Back in their cots, Nate couldn't sleep. Where did it come from? The question gnawed at him sharp and relentless. He thought of the sea the way it watched them, its waves curling like fingers. Russell was silent, but his breathing was uneven too fast. The lighthouse felt smaller, its walls closing in. The beacon spun again, its light sweeping through the room. But it didn't feel safe. Something had been inside, and it wasn't gone. Nate clutched his flashlight, staring at the ceiling, waiting for the next sign. The island was awake, and it knew they were there. The smell came before the cloth, a reek so foul, Nate gagged his stomach, twisting as if the sea itself had crawled inside. It was the 5th day on Matinus Rock, and the island had shed its pretense of normalcy. The air was a living thing, now thick with salt, and something darker, something that clung to the back of Nate's throat. He and Russell worked in silence, their movements mechanical. The routine was all they had, but it was fraying. The lighthouse loomed above its light, steady, but cold, like a gaze that never blinked. They checked the generator, scrubbed corrosion from the stairwell, and tested the beacon's batteries. Nate's hands shook. As he worked through, he hid it from Russell. The memory of the cloth, the way it felt heavy and wrong, stuck with him. He saw it in his mind, slimy, dripping alive in a way it shouldn't be. Russell was quieter than usual, his eyes avoiding Nate's. They didn't talk about the night before, but the question hung between them. How did it get there? That night, it happened again. Nate woke just after 2 a.m., the darkness pressing against him. The beacon wasn't turning. Not again. His pulse raced a drumbeat in his ears. He grabbed his flashlight and woke Russell, who looked at him with something close to dread. They climbed the staircase, the air growing colder with each step. The beacon room was a tomb, the gears grinding uselessly. There, in the same spot, was another cloth. Smaller this time, a red scarf or shawl frayed and soaked. It glistened in the flashlight's beam water, pooling beneath it, studded with tiny crustaceans that twitched and skittered. The smell was worse, a choking mix of brine and rot. It came from the sea. Nate's hands trembled as he pulled it free, its texture like flesh under his fingers. Russell stood back, his face gray, muttering something Nate couldn't hear. They checked the door, the windows. Everything was locked, just like before. No one could have done this. Nate tossed the cloth outside, watching it vanish into the dark. But the smell lingered, seeping into his clothes, his skin. Back in the auxiliary building, they sat in silence. Nate's mind raced, grasping for answers. Was someone here? A prank? But the island was empty, the sea a barrier. No one could cross unseen. Russell stared at the floor, his hands clenched. "It's not right," he said, finally, his voice barely audible. Nate didn't answer. He didn't trust his voice. Something was playing with them, toying with the light. The beacon spun again, but its glow felt hollow, like a lie. The lighthouse wasn't theirs anymore. Russell's eyes betrayed him. First, staring into the dark, as if it spoke back, his whispers filling the room with dread. By the 6th day, Matinus Rock had become a prison. The sea was a wall, the sky a lid, and the lighthouse a trap. Nate felt it in his bones, a certainty that something was watching, waiting. The routine was a lifeline, but it was slipping. He and Russell worked side by side, checking wires, cleaning lenses, but the silence between them was heavy, edged with fear. Russell was changing. He moved slower, his hands unsteady. His eyes lingered on the sea, on the rocks, on the shadows in the lighthouse. Nate caught him, muttering once words too soft to make out, as if he were answering someone. Who's he talking to? Nate didn't ask. He didn't want to know. The cloths had shaken them both, but Russell seemed to carry the weight differently, as if the island was inside him now. On the 7th night, it broke open. Nate woke to Russell's voice, low and uneven, coming from across the room. He wasn't talking to Nate. He was facing the corner where the walls met in shadow, speaking in fragments. Not yet. I see you. Nate's skin prickled. He's losing it. He called out, his voice sharper than he meant. Russell blinked, confused, and said he hadn't spoken. But his eyes were wrong, too wide, too bright. Later that night, Nate found him at the window, staring at the rocks below. The beacon's light swept over the island, and Russell pointed his hand, shaking. Someone was there, he said, last night, on the rocks, watching us. Nate looked, but the rocks were empty, the sea a black void. He's seeing things. But the fear in Russell's voice was real, and it sank into Nate like a blade. The lighthouse felt alive, its walls listening, its shadows moving when they shouldn't. Nate heard it before he saw it, the whisper of a name, not his spoken in the dark. The 8th day on Matinus Rock was a blur of tension. The lighthouse was no longer a refuge. It was a cage. Nate and Russell barely spoke, their trust eroded by fear. The sea roared louder, its waves clawing at the rocks as if hungry for them. Nate clung to the routine, checking the beacon tightening bolts, but his hands shook, his mind racing. What's out there? Russell was worse. He barely ate, barely slept. He sat by the window for hours, staring at the rocks, his face hollow. Nate asked if he was okay, but Russell's answers were vague mutterings about noises in the walls, voices from the stairwell. He's breaking. Nate felt it too. The island's weight pressing down. But he fought it, focusing on the work, the light. On the 9th night, they both heard it. Footsteps on the spiral staircase, slow and deliberate, coming from the beacon room above. No one's up there. Nate's heart pounded, his flashlight shaking in his hand. Russell stood at the stairwell's base, frozen, staring up. Did you go up? Nate asked. Russell shook his head, his voice a whisper. Did you? The footsteps stopped, but the silence was worse, thick with menace. Something was in the lighthouse, and it wasn't human. The footsteps came like a heartbeat, slow and relentless, each one a promise of something waiting above. The 10th day was a descent into dread. Matinus Rock was no longer just an island. It was a presence alive and malevolent. Nate and Russell barricaded the stairwell each night, shoving crates against the door. But it didn't help. The lighthouse watched them, its light a cold eye that saw too much. The routine was gone. They checked the beacon out of habit, but their movements were frantic, their eyes darting to every shadow. Russell was a shell, his voice reduced to murmurs, his gaze fixed on the sea. Nate felt the island's pull a whisper in his mind. You can't leave. He pushed it away, focusing on the work, but the fear was a living thing coiled in his chest. On the 11th night, the footsteps returned. Louder this time, heavier, echoing through the lighthouse. Nate woke, his breath caught in his throat. Russell was already up, staring at the stairwell, his face white. The sound was unmistakable. Someone was walking, descending from the beacon room. They stood, frozen, listening, until the silence returned. It's waiting for us. Nate shoved a dresser against the door, his hands shaking, and they slept with knives under their pillows. The door swung open, and the wind screamed, but it was the silence inside that tore Nate apart. The 12th day was chaos. The lighthouse was a battlefield, its walls scarred by their fear. Nate and Russell barely spoke, their trust shattered. The sea was a roar, the sky a bruise, and the island a trap closing around them. They checked the beacon one last time, their hands trembling, their eyes avoiding each other. That night, the beacon failed again. Nate woke to darkness, the light gone. They climbed the staircase, the air thick with dread. The beacon room door was wide open, the wind howling through. The bulb industrial impossible to move without tools was unscrewed, standing upright in the center of the room. Someone did this. Nate felt a cold touch on his back, a brush of something unseen. He spun, but no one was there. Russell pointed at the wall, whispering a hand. It came out of the bricks. They ran, locking themselves in the bedroom, the lighthouse alive around them. The call came at 2:12 a.m. A voice that wasn't Nate's, begging for rescue from Matinus Rock. The final day was a blur of terror. Nate used the sat phone at dawn, his voice shaking as he reported a mechanical failure. The boat arrived that afternoon, but the crew asked about a distress call from 2:12 a.m. A garbled voice, static, someone saying, "They're here with us." Nate hadn't touched the phone. Russell was silent, his eyes empty. The ride back was quiet, the sea a mirror of their fear. Russell quit the Coast Guard months later, never speaking of Matinus Rock. Nate still works, but he'll never return. The island keeps its secrets, and it's not done with them. The lighthouse stands its light, sweeping the sea, a warning to those who come too close. In the dead of lockdown, when the world felt like a cage, I felt eyes on me, watching from the dark. It was early 2020, and Suffolk County, Long Island, was a ghost town. Streets empty, shops shuttered, everyone trapped in their homes, scrolling screens to escape the boredom. I was single, restless, swiping on Tinder, DMing strangers, anything to feel alive. That's when Sophia slid into my life. Soph, she called herself, online, a girl I'd followed on Instagram for years, but never met. She was local, just 5 minutes away, and her vibe was electric, rebellious, fearless, the kind of person who'd laugh in the face of a closed sign. We clicked instantly, trading messages about movies, music, and the suffocating weight of lockdown. One night, boredom got the better of us, and she suggested we hang out. I picked her up in my beat-up sedan. The streets unnaturally quiet, like the world was holding its breath. Sophia hopped in her hair, willed a grin that promised trouble. We drove to a nearby park, already closed for the night, and cracked open some White Claws, the cans sweating in the spring air. The park was dark, the swings still, the silence broken only by our laughter. Something felt off, though a prickle on my neck, like we weren't alone. I brushed it away, blaming the alcohol, the isolation. Sophia was magnetic, her stories pulling me, in her eyes glinting with mischief. Within an hour, she had a plan: drive out to Montauk, walk the cliff walk around the lighthouse. It was a crazy idea. The lighthouse grounds were closed, maybe even locked down entirely, but her confidence was contagious. "Let's chase the night," she seemed to say, and I was all in. The drive to Montauk Point was long, the roads empty, the darkness swallowing the world beyond my headlights. Sophia fiddled with the radio, settling on a staticky rock station, her voice cutting through the hum. She'd done this before, she said, sneaking onto the lighthouse grounds, even before COVID. "No one's out there," she assured me, her tone light but firm. "Not on a Tuesday night, not in the off-season." I nodded, but my grip on the wheel tightened. What if someone was? The thought flickered unformed, and I pushed it down. Montauk was an hour away, a world apart from the Hamptons' polish or Suffolk's sprawl. It was raw wild, the kind of place where the sea felt closer than the land. When we reached the lighthouse parking lot, the night was thick, the air heavy with salt and damp. The Montauk Lighthouse loomed ahead, a black silhouette against the sky, its beams slicing through the dark like a blade. It was beautiful, but wrong, like a painting you don't want to touch. I hesitated, scanning the lot for security, but it was empty. No cars, no lights, just us. Sophia laughed at my caution, already climbing out, a White Claw in hand. "Relax," she said, her voice a dare. We sat in the lot, sipping the lighthouse, watching us. I kept glancing around, expecting headlights, a guard, anything. Sophia's confidence held me steady, but the night felt alive, its edges sharp. We finished our drinks, the alcohol buzzing in my veins, and started toward the lighthouse. Up close, it was massive. Its stone walls weathered its light, hypnotic, as it swept the sea. There's something about a lighthouse at night, half beacon, half warning. Sophia led the way, skirting the main entrance. To avoid the beam, her steps sure. I followed my heart, pounding, not from fear, but from the thrill of breaking rules. The cliff walk was behind the lighthouse, a narrow path of rocks hugging the cliff's edge, waves crashing below. We flicked on our phone flashlights, the beams cutting through the dark, revealing slick stones and jagged drops. This was our adventure, our rebellion against the lockdown's grip. But the night had plans of its own, and we were walking straight into them. The lighthouse stood like a giant in the dark, its light sweeping the sea, but it couldn't see what was coming for us. We reached the Montauk Lighthouse parking lot just after midnight, the gravel crunching under my tires, the sound swallowed by the night. The air was cool, sharp, with the tang of salt, and the sea roared in the distance, a low, constant growl. Sophia was already out of the car, stretching her silhouette framed against the lighthouse's beam. It was eerie, that light, steady, relentless, like it knew something we didn't. I locked the car, my eyes scanning the empty lot, the shadows pooling beyond the asphalt. No security, no signs of life, just us, the lighthouse and the sea. We cracked open another round of White Claws, leaning against the car, the metal cold against my back. Sophia's laughter was bright, cutting through the night, but I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. The dark was too thick, too close. I sipped my drink, the fizz sharp on my tongue, and tried to focus on her stories, wild nights, close calls, the kind of life that made lockdown feel like a prison. She was fearless, her eyes gleaming as she talked about sneaking onto the lighthouse grounds before dodging rangers climbing fences. "It's fine," she said, catching my nervous glance toward the lot. "No one's out here." I wanted to believe her, but the lighthouse felt alive, its beam sweeping over us like a searchlight. We tossed our empty cans into the car and started walking. The lighthouse towered above its stone walls, pitted by years of wind and spray. Up close, it wasn't just a building. It was a presence, old and unyielding. Sophia led us around the side, away from the front entrance, where a few dim lights glowed. The cliff walk was our goal, a rocky path that wound along the cliff's edge, hidden from view. Our flashlights bobbed, casting jittery beams across the ground, picking out weeds, pebbles, and the occasional glint of sea spray. The path was narrow. The rocks slick the drop to the ocean below, invisible but ever present. One wrong step, and the sea would take you. The thought made my stomach twist, but Sophia's confidence pulled me forward. We reached the cliff walk, the lighthouse looming behind us, its beam cutting through the night. The sea was louder here, waves crashing against the rocks below, the sound the constant pulse. It felt like the island was breathing, watching. Sophia walked ahead, her flashlight steady, her steps sure. I followed my beam, sweeping the path, my heart racing with a mix of thrill and unease. The air was damp, clinging to my skin, and the darkness pressed in, broken only by our lights. We were alone, or so I thought. But the night has a way of hiding things, doesn't it? The cliff walk stretched ahead, a ribbon of stone between the lighthouse and the sea. And we were about to learn what it hid. The flashlight caught his face, and the night turned to ice, his eyes locked on us from the dark. We were halfway along the cliff walk, the Montauk Lighthouse's beam sweeping overhead, when Sophia stopped. Her flashlight tilted its beam, slicing through the night, and I heard her say my name, sharp and low. Something was wrong. I turned my own light, following hers, and there he was, a man standing on the rocks behind us, maybe 20 feet away. His hoodie hid most of his face, but his eyes glinted in the light, unblinking, fixed on us. He shouldn't be here. My stomach dropped the air, suddenly too thin, the sea's roar too loud. I called out, my voice shaky, asking if he worked here. No answer, just that stare, his body still, like a statue carved from the night. Who was he? Sophia gripped my arm, her nails digging in, but she didn't speak. I tried again, saying we'd leave, apologizing, hoping he was just a guard, someone official. Then he spoke, his voice low, rough. Y'all want to buy some coke? Not a guard. Not safe. The words hit like a punch, my mind racing. Why was he here, on a closed cliff walk in the middle of nowhere? My mouth went dry, but I managed a no man. We're good waving. Sophia forward, urging her to move. We started walking faster now. The rocks slippery under our feet, the flashlight beams bouncing wildly. He was still there, watching moving. I glanced back, and he was following, matching our pace, his steps silent but deliberate. The distance between us stayed the same, like he was tethered to us, a shadow we couldn't shake. What did he want? Sophia was in front, now, her breathing quick, her light sweeping the path. I kept my flashlight on him, his hoodie blending into the dark, his face a smudge of menace. The cliff walk felt narrower, the sea closer, the lighthouse's beam, a cruel spotlight that showed us nothing. Every few steps I looked back, and he was there, steady, relentless. He's not stopping. My heart pounded, my palms slick with sweat, despite the cold. Sophia whispered something, but I couldn't hear over the waves, the blood rushing in my ears. The cliff walk was endless, each rock a test, each moment a question. What happens if he catches us? The lighthouse loomed behind its light, useless, its presence mocking. We were alone with him, and the night was his domain. Footsteps echoed behind us, too close, too many, the night alive with predators. The cliff walk was a trap, its rocks slick, its edges sharp, the sea waiting below. Sophia and I moved faster, our flashlights jerking our breaths ragged. The man in the hoodie was still behind us, his pace steady, his silence louder than the waves. He wasn't alone anymore. I glanced back, my light catching two more figures emerging from the dark, their shapes vague, but moving toward us. 3 of them now. My chest tightened, fear clawing at my throat. This wasn't a chance encounter. This was a hunt. We reached the end of the cliff walk, scrambling onto the grassy slope leading back to the parking lot. The lighthouse's beam swept over us cold and indifferent as we pushed through the tall grass, the car, a distant beacon of safety. They were closer, their steps heavier, deliberate. I didn't dare look back, but I heard them, boots on gravel, low voices, words I couldn't make out. Sophia grabbed my hand, her fingers cold, her eyes wide with panic. "Don't stop," she hissed, and we broke into a half-run, the grass snagging at our legs, the night pressing down. The car was in sight, its outline faint in the dark, but the men were right behind us, too close. One of them called out, his voice sharp, mocking. "Where you going?" The words sent a jolt through me, my legs burning as we pushed forward. Another voice joined in a garbled shout, and I realized they were spreading out, flanking us. They wanted us trapped. I fumbled for my keys, my hands shaking, the flashlight beam wild. Sophia was beside me, her breath hitching, her light fixed on the car. We couldn't run outright. It would trigger a chase, but every step felt like a gamble, the distance to safety shrinking too slowly. We reached the car, yanking the doors open, and dove inside. They were on us. The men were at the car, their shapes looming, hands grabbing at the handles. As I slammed the lock button, Sophia screamed, her voice raw, as one of them pounded on her window, the glass shuddering. I jammed the key into the ignition, the engine roaring to life, and threw the car into reverse, the only clear path. They were everywhere, their fists hitting the hood, their faces blurred in the dark. Tires screeched, gravel flew, and we peeled out, the men's shouts fading as we hit the road, the lighthouse shrinking in the rear view. The night let us go, but its claws stayed in me. The memory of those eyes, a stain I can't wash out. We tore away from Montauk Point, the road a blur, the sea's roar fading behind us. My hands gripped the wheel knuckles, white, my heart still hammering. Sophia was silent, her face pale, her eyes fixed on the dashboard. We'd escaped, but it didn't feel like victory. The adrenaline ebbed, leaving a hollow ache, the kind that comes when you realize how close you came to something terrible. The lighthouse was gone, but its shadow followed us, a weight in the air, a whisper in the dark. The drive back was quiet, the radio off the night pressing against the windows. I dropped Sophia off at her place, her house, a small glow in the empty street. She hugged me, quick and tight, her voice low. "We're okay." But her eyes said otherwise, and so did mine. That night changed something, broke something. We hung out after grabbed coffee, swapped stories, but Montauk was a topic. We skirted a wound we didn't touch. The lighthouse was off limits, a place we'd never return to, not at night, not ever, my friends. When I told them, had theories, gang members maybe, Crips out there for a deal gone wrong. It made sense, but it didn't explain the way those eyes felt, the way the night seemed to breathe with them. They weren't just men. They were part of the dark. I still drive past Montauk sometimes, in daylight, the lighthouse a distant speck, but at night I stay away. The cliff walk, the rocks, the sea, they hold something I don't want to meet again. Some nights I still feel them, watching, waiting for me to come back. Ian woke from a dream where the sea whispered his name, its cold fingers pulling him into the deep, and he knew he'd never escape its call. My name is Gregory, and this is the story of my friend Ian, a man who'd faced the ocean's wrath and walked away, but not unchanged. In 2022, he sat across from me, his face lined with years of salt and wind, his eyes carrying a weight I couldn't name. Ian was no storyteller, no dreamer of ghosts. He'd spent decades in marine salvage, fixing rigs, diving wrecks, inspecting remote outposts for the government. He was solid grounded, the kind of man who trusted his hands over his fears. So when he handed me a written account of what happened in 2013 on a forgotten rock off Washington's coast, I read every word, and I believed him. He gave me permission to share it, because some truths need to be told, even if they sound like madness. It was a small county job, nothing special at first glance. They'd inherited a decommissioned lighthouse on a speck of an island, just 300 feet of stone and dirt, an hour from the mainland. Developers wanted it torn down. Historians wanted it saved. No one wanted to pay for either. Ian's task was straightforward. Go alone, inspect the structure, and report if it could be restored. The island was a grave, and Ian was walking into it. He packed light 4 days' food, a sleeping bag, tools, a clipboard, a marine radio, and set out unconcerned. He'd done solo jobs before, thrived in the quiet of open water. But this island was different, and the sea knew it. The boat ride was brutal waves slamming the hull, the sky a heavy gray that seemed to press the air from his lungs. Ian stood at the bow, his jacket flapping, watching the island emerge like a shadow from the haze. It was wrong, that place too small, too silent, like it didn't want him there. The lighthouse rose, 50 feet, its stone, weathered paint peeling to reveal brick scarred by time. A rusted generator shed sat nearby, and old scaffolding lay scattered half-buried in dirt. There was no dock, just a rocky ledge where the boat could unload at high tide. The boatman left him with a nod, promising to return Thursday, and Ian was alone. Or so he thought. The lighthouse stood its glass lens dark, its silence a weight that settled in his chest. The sea roared, and the island watched, waiting for him to step into its trap. Ian set up on the ground floor, near the generator room, where the air was less biting. The lighthouse was old, built in the early 1900s, its spiral staircase narrow, its walls damp with the memory of storms. It felt alive, though, like it was breathing, watching. He shook the thought away, focusing on the job. He checked beams, tested stairs, inspected windows. The floorboards were warped, but held his weight. The second floor was a storage room, empty, except for rusted cabinets that smelled of metal and decay. The third had a sleeping quarter, abandoned dust thick in the air. Every step echoed too loud, too final. Outside, the island was barren, just rock and dirt. The sea, a constant presence, its waves curling like claws. The first day passed in a blur of measurements and notes. Ian walked the island's edge, clipboard in hand, noting cracks in the lighthouse's base corrosion on the shed. The scaffolding was a mess, twisted metal left to rot. No birds, no insects, just the sea, and even that felt muted. The air was heavy, thick with salt, and something darker, something that clung to his skin. He ate a cold meal, canned beans, and bread, and spread his sleeping bag on the ground floor. The lighthouse loomed above its silence, louder than the waves. It was waiting, and Ian felt it, a prickle on his neck he couldn't shake. He lay down the radio, closed the flashlight closer, and tried to sleep. The darkness was absolute, pressing against his eyes, and the sea whispered not a lullaby, but a warning. The next morning, Ian woke to a world unchanged. Gray sky, gray sea, gray stone. The island felt smaller, the lighthouse larger, its shadow a cage. He climbed to the beacon room, the staircase cold underfoot, each step a hollow ring. The lens was intact, though long dead, its glass clouded with age. From the top, the sea stretched endless. No land, no boats, just water and sky blurring into one. He was alone, but the island wasn't empty. The thought came unbidden, a splinter in his mind. He pushed it away, focusing on his notes, the rhythm of the work. By dusk, he was back on the ground floor, the lighthouse's silence, a weight he couldn't ignore. Something was out there, or in here, and it knew his name. The sea roared, and the island waited its secrets buried in the stone. The island held its breath. Its silence, a scream that tore at Ian's edges. The first day had been routine, but routine was a lie on this rock. Ian woke to the same gray world. The sea's roar, a constant pulse, the lighthouse looming like a judge. It wasn't just a building. It was a presence, old and unyielding. He worked methodically, checking the generator, scraping rust from the stairwell, testing bolts. The air was damp, heavy with salt and decay, and it clung to him, seeping into his clothes, his lungs. Something was wrong, and he felt it in his bones. The island was too quiet, its silence a void that pressed against him, demanding attention. He walked the perimeter again. The rocks slick underfoot, the sea's spray cold on his face. No life, no sound, just the lighthouse, watching. The scaffolding was a hazard metal, twisted by years of neglect. But Ian left it alone, his focus on the structure. The lighthouse's base was cracked, the brick eroding, but it stood firm, defiant. It had secrets, and it wasn't sharing. He noted every detail, his clipboard filling with numbers, but his mind kept drifting to the sea, to the way it watched him, its waves curling like fingers, beckoning him closer. Inside the staircase was colder, the air thicker. Ian climbed to the second floor, checking cabinets, finding nothing but rust and dust. The lighthouse was empty, but it didn't feel that way. The sleeping quarter on the third floor was a relic. Its mattress rotted its walls, stained with time. He stood there, flashlight in hand, the beam cutting through the gloom, and felt the weight of the place. It was alive in its way, and it didn't want him here. He shook it off, blaming the isolation, the long hours. But the feeling lingered, a shadow he couldn't outrun. Back on the ground floor, Ian ate another cold meal. The taste metallic, the silence deafening. The island was a trap, and he was caught. He lay in his sleeping bag, the lighthouse looming above its walls, a barrier between him and the world. The sea roared louder now, its voice a challenge. "What are you hiding?" He closed his eyes, but sleep was far off the darkness, too heavy, too alive. The flashlight stayed on its beam, a thin defense against the night. He wasn't alone, not anymore. The thought came sharp and unyielding, and Ian gripped the radio, his lifeline to a world that felt too far away. The next day, Ian worked faster, his hands unsteady, his eyes darting to shadows that shouldn't move. The lighthouse was watching its silence, a lie. He checked the beacon room again, the lens a dead eye staring back. The view was the same sea sky, nothing else. But it felt different, heavier, like the island was closing in. Something was here, and it was waking up. He descended the staircase, each step a reminder of his isolation, and paused at the ground floor, his breath catching. The air was wrong, thicker, colder, like it was holding something back. The island knew his name, and it wasn't letting go. He stepped outside the sea's roar, a roar in his ears, and felt the lighthouse's gaze on his back, unblinking, eternal. The fog came like a living thing, swallowing the island, and it brought a secret that wasn't meant to be found. On the second day, Ian woke to a world gone white. The fog was so thick, it felt solid, a wall that erased the sea, the rocks, the sky. It wasn't fog. It was a shroud, hiding something alive. He stood at the lighthouse's base, his breath visible, his skin damp with the cold. Visibility was barely 5 feet, the world reduced to a void that pressed against him. It was watching, waiting, and Ian felt its eyes. He'd seen fog before, heavy and cruel, but this was different, dense, deliberate, like it had a purpose. He worked inside the lighthouse, his only refuge, though it felt less safe with each step. The staircase was colder, the air heavier, the walls slick with condensation. The lighthouse was breathing its pulse, slow, steady, menacing. Ian climbed to the beacon room, his flashlight cutting through the gloom, its beam too weak against the fog's weight. Halfway up, he stopped, his heart lurching. A maintenance closet, its door rusted. Shut the day before, was open, just a crack, the hinges loose. It shouldn't be open. His pulse raced, his light probing the darkness inside. In the corner, barely visible, was a wooden box the size of a lunchbox, covered in damp moss, like it had been dredged from the sea. It didn't belong here, and it knew it. The smell hit him. Brine rot, the stench of something long dead. It was alive in its way, and it was watching. Ian's hands shook as he shut the door, the hinges resisting, the wood groaning under his touch. He made a note to report it, but the box stayed in his mind, a weight he couldn't shake. What was it? Why was it here? The lighthouse felt smaller, its walls closing in its silence. A scream. He worked through the day, checking gears, noting cracks, but his eyes kept drifting to the closet, to the shadow it held. The fog was hiding something, and the box was its voice. That night, Yin lay in his sleeping bag, the fog pressing against the windows, the lighthouse a tomb. Something woke him, not a sound, but its absence, a void that swallowed the world. Then it came, footsteps on the spiral staircase, slow, deliberate, climbing to the beacon room. No one's here. His heart pounded his flashlight beam, shaking as he aimed it at the stairwell. The steps rang softly, metal under bare feet, moving upward. Something was in the lighthouse, and it wasn't human. He waited frozen, the beam trembling in his hand, but the sound stopped. The silence worse, thick with menace. It was still there, waiting. Ian didn't sleep. His eyes fixed on the darkness, the box's image burning in his mind, the sea's roar a chant outside. The footsteps climbed, and Ian knew the lighthouse had claimed him. The second night's terror lingered a stain on his mind. The fog hadn't lifted its white wall, unbroken the island, a prison of mist. It wasn't fog. It was a cage, and Ian was trapped. He worked the next morning, his hands unsteady, his eyes darting to shadows that moved when they shouldn't. The staircase was colder, the air thicker, the lighthouse alive with something he couldn't name. It was watching, always watching. He checked the beacon room, the lens untouched, the gears still, but the closet door haunted him, its crack a silent accusation. He opened it, his flashlight trembling, and found the box still there, its moss glistening, water pooling beneath. It hadn't moved, but it felt different, heavier. He shut the door, his breath shallow, and climbed to the roof, the fog swallowing the world below. He wasn't alone. Not anymore. Back inside, he froze. The closet door was open again, wider, and the box was outside, halfway into the stairwell, its surface slick with seawater. It moved. Ian's heart stopped, his mind racing. No one could have done this. He stood there, staring the lighthouse's silence, a roar in his ears, the sea's voice louder, hungrier. He picked up the box, its weight unnatural, the wood bloated, nailed shut. It felt alive, like it was breathing. He set it at the stairwell's base, his hands shaking, and stepped outside the fog, a wall around him. That's when he saw the footprints, bare wet, leading from the lighthouse to the cliff's edge, stopping at a sheer drop into the sea. They didn't come back. Ian's stomach twisted, his mind grasping for answers. Who walked here? Why did they stop? The fog hid the truth. But the island knew, and it was telling him to leave. He wasn't welcome, and the lighthouse was done. Pretending, he locked every door, every hatch, and wedged the stairwell shut with an iron pipe. But it felt futile, a gesture against something unstoppable. The footprints stopped at the edge, and the sea called its voice, a promise of oblivion. The third day was a descent into dread. The fog was thicker, the lighthouse a shadow in the mist, its walls closing in like a fist. Ian worked mechanically, checking beams, noting cracks, but his eyes kept drifting to the stairwell, to the box. It was still there, its moss a stain, its presence a weight. The footprints haunted him, their path to the cliff, a question he couldn't answer. Who walked here? What did they want? The sea roared below, its voice, louder, hungrier, like it was waiting for him to follow. He checked the island again, the fog so dense he could barely see his hands. It was alive, that fog, and it wanted him blind. The footprints were gone, washed away, or hidden, but their memory lingered, a scar in his mind. Ian locked every door, every hatch, and reinforced the stairwell with the pipe. It wouldn't stop what was coming. The lighthouse was no longer a shelter. It was a trap, its silence a lie. He ate a cold meal, his stomach churning, and lay down the radio, close the flashlight, closer. The island was awake, and it knew his name. That night, around 1:30 a.m., the beacon room door slammed shut, the force shaking dust from the ceiling. It wasn't the wind. It was deliberate. Then came the knocking 3 slow, heavy knocks from inside the tower's wall, like someone stood just behind the plaster, tapping with purpose. It's here. Ian froze, his breath shallow, his flashlight useless against the dark. The knocks stopped, But the silence was worse, a void that swallowed him. The lighthouse was alive, and it wasn't his. He stayed awake, the box's weight in his mind, the footprints a path he couldn't unsee, the sea's roar, a chant that never stopped. The knocks came from the wall, and Ian knew the island had marked him. The third night broke him. The fog was a shroud, the lighthouse a tomb, its walls pulsing with something ancient. Ian didn't work the next morning. He packed his hands, shaking his eyes, darting to the stairwell. The box was gone, the closet door wide open, like a mouth waiting to speak. He checked the beacon room, the lens untouched, the door still closed. It didn't matter. The lighthouse had spoken. He used the radio, his voice unsteady, reporting a medical issue, begging for extraction. The fog didn't clear, growing thicker, the air colder. It was watching, waiting. Ian sat by the landing ledge, the radio silent, the sea a distant roar. Hours passed. 7. At least the fog a wall he couldn't pierce. He wasn't alone. Footsteps crunched on the gravel behind the lighthouse, slow, deliberate. But the fog hid their source. Something was there, and it followed. Ian ran to the cliff's edge, his flashlight useless, his heart pounding. The boat's horn sounded at dusk, a lifeline in the mist. He was leaving, but the island wasn't letting go. The sea roared, and the lighthouse watched its silence, a promise of return. The fog hid the truth, but the footsteps followed a shadow Ian couldn't outrun. The boat arrived after dark, its lights faint in the fog, the horn a call to salvation. Ian climbed aboard his legs, weak, his eyes hollow. The deckhand asked why he looked like he'd seen a ghost, and Ian muttered something about the lighthouse being unsafe. He didn't tell them about the box, the footprints, the knocks. He filed a report back at the office, calling the structure compromised, unfit for entry. But he left out the truth. Some things you don't say, because they sound like madness. Ian never went back. He wrapped up his projects that year, phased out field work, and stayed on dry land. The sea had taken enough. When I asked what really happened, he looked at me, his eyes sharp but tired, and said, "Some places are meant to be left alone. They need time and silence." That was all he'd give me. I tried to find the lighthouse, but the coordinates he'd scribbled led nowhere. County records mentioned a decommissioned tower, but no name, no history. It's like it was never there. And that's what keeps me up at night. Not what Ian saw, but what no one else did. The lighthouse was gone, but its shadow stayed a secret the sea would never tell. Ian's story ended, but it didn't leave me. I've told it to others, watched their eyes widen, their questions pile up. Was it real? Was Ian losing it? I don't know. And that's the worst part. The lighthouse, the island, the fog, they're out there, or they're not. But Ian believed, and that's enough. He's gone now, retired to a quiet life. But I see the sea in his eyes, the weight of that rock. Some places mark you, and you never shake them. The lighthouse stands, or doesn't, its light long dead, its secrets buried in the fog.